Welcome. Hey, everybody. It's a frame rate. You got it. Woo! I'm Abe Epperson. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm excited to be here, but even more excited to, introduce my partner in crime, my friend who is a criminal,
your
my co-host.
Raison d'être, your l'esprit d'escalier. Sweetness in this house. You got Michael Swaim.
Wow.
Michael Swaim. Woo! And if you haven't heard or read, we brought a friend along this time.
I'm a friend.
Like we usually do.
Yeah.
Announce yourself, friend.
I'm friend Adam Ganser.
Adam,
Yeah.
You're a director.
I've heard that.
Friend of small beans.
Yeah.
You're one of the beans.
One of them.
We got 3 big beans
It's a
going
3-bean
on.
salad.
Yeah, it's excellent. And here today, as you read, we are covering the 1994 romantic mystery
As
film.
you read, I get it.
Yeah. 3 colors, red, which is part of a trilogy. We'll get more into that later. But yeah, I just wanted quickly before we get the show on the road that this was a pick the flick, as we all have been doing
Referring
a
to
lot
it
of
as,
recently
yeah.
and referring to. Pick the Flick is our tier on Patreon where you can come and, donate, and we will do a little bit of a frame rate on a film of your choosing. This one goes out to Ashley, who chose this film. Ashley, thank you.
Thank you, Ashley C.
And
Thank you.
we hope you enjoy this episode. So,
Yeah, it's
right.
interesting to note that we say your last initial and not your full name. Because this is a movie about whether it's okay to invade people's privacy or not. So we
Whether
decided
judges should be allowed to
be
do it,
conservative
you know?
on that front.
Secondary
I don't know
issue.
if it's about if it's okay.
Then
then
let's get into it.
let's get it on.
Let's
get it rated and going. All right.
Although,
so,
Abe,
yeah.
I want to ask because, full disclosure, I am aware of 3 colors as a trilogy, like as a unit of film, and I know it's highly respected and regarded. It's, if in case the listeners don't know, 3 colors. It's a trilogy of French films, and as far as I can tell, the colors are based on, from left to right, the French flag colors. So it goes blue, white, red. So this is actually the 3rd part in a trilogy, and this is the only one I've seen. But my understanding from Wikipedia is they are not connected concretely like a normal trilogy, right? So that's fine. I didn't miss context.
Yeah, they are not. They're thematically connected. There is one
The ending connection.
The ending of this film has the people who survive at the end of this film are people who are from the other films.
Oh, blue and
Yes.
white. Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
and it's kind of the 3 Colors trilogy is specifically about the 3 principles of the French Revolution, which I believe are freedom, liberty, and fraternity. And this one is fraternity, or like blood, right?
Camaraderie.
Camaraderie and
Yeah.
your neighbor, and it deals a lot with neighbors. It's all about a little section of a neighborhood.
By the way, how pretty is French? It's just fun to listen to. Man,
Yeah, I loved it.
the language in this, yeah.
Très bien.
So French acted, French made film, English subtitles.
Polish director.
Oh,
Yeah.
shit.
Kieslowski is Polish.
All right, science
Yeah.
me, film nerds.
Well, it's all right.
No, I mean, you said before we started rolling that like this is taught in film school, so
It
We
is.
both watched it in film school, in fact.
sure.
This film,
Yeah.
and at UCSD I watched Blue.
Yeah.
I have yet to watch White, which just shows how much I'm I'm a film buff, and then I don't go and finish the trilogy on my own.
It's a
I
very
have to be-
notable trilogy in film.
Yeah.
White is less engaging than blue or red. I think that's.
It makes sense that you've seen this film, or you've seen White,
That seems
because
like my
Adam was
thing.
always
Yeah.
pretentious. It's kind of your
Yeah,
thing.
a little bit.
Yeah.
No, I do like the high art films from time to time. I do like them.
What was the general read from your class when it was shown in film school?
I'm so glad you asked that.
What was their analysis as a collective?
It was really just sort of trying to make us not all do blockbuster films. Like, it was like a pitch in the first semester from like an indie filmmaker who was teaching like a general intro to film school class. Just like, cinema can also be this. And then we watched, I'm serious. And then we watched this movie and it was like, yeah. And then the rest of us were like, but Transformers though.
I would give it that though. Like, it's very
Transformers, though.
on its surface. I found it very engaging and entertaining, even though it's just people talking about human stuff. But of course I do. That's a valid genre of storytelling.
Right.
I didn't need that pitched to me, but it's good. I really enjoyed it just as a overview. As a movie.
It's really good. I actually thought, because I'd seen it before, I thought I was going to be like, it's going to be tough because it's like subtitles are on and I want to do other things, and I've seen it, but I actually was captivated. Like, I actually sat down and realized that like an hour and 20 minutes had passed through the film, and I had not looked away. It's really good. Yeah. It's really good if that's your cup of tea. Obviously, some people are here for the blockbusters. This has really interesting characters and interesting interactions that you just go, like, that's not like crazy, but like it's very fun.
It also it bears a lot of rewatches. I've watched this
like,
I think 3 times now, and I still enjoy it even on the 3rd time.
And I can see why Ashley suggested this to us, or why they thought it might be up our alley. And I think it's true. Is that it subtly, because the director shows a lot of control and I think elegance with the simplicity of the shots. You could watch this and very easily miss every single symbol. Like, the symbols are not beating you over the head. But if you are like us and you like to look for symbols and shit, they're everywhere. It's lousy with like visual metaphors. Yeah.
It's partly because the premise of it is so unassuming. Like, the conflict is pretty small. Like, there's no Transformers in it, as I keep mentioning. But, like, there's not even, like, a heightened premise, really.
The judge transforms by the end of his arc, I would say.
Touche.
Oh.
No,
that's really good.
That's so good.
Yeah, I'm such a fan of that joke. But more to that.
The point is, there's more than meets the eye with this film.
Yes.
It's a treatise in disguise. Sorry, I'm done.
Can we get something? Speaking of like the subdued kind of plot lines of this film, Adam, typically we on Frame Rate ask the guest to give like a quip synopsis.
Yeah.
It can be anything from a log line to a paragraph of like what happens in this film.
Okay, so broadly speaking, this film begins with a phone call from a mysterious person named Michelle, who is a overseas lover that we never meet in the film, calling our protagonist, who is a model / university student.
Slash dancer,
yes, just
Valentine,
yeah, just a general lady about town. She is basically living a fairly contented life, and after one of her photo shoots, she accidentally hits a dog with her car. She takes the dog to its owner, which she tracks down from the collar or whatever, and it turns out to be this judge who he comes off like sort of a nihilist, like he's quit on life and very morose, and she is upset by that, and so she finds herself sort of needing to find out more about him. So she ends up returning to the house in the guise of taking care of the dog, and finds out the dog has puppies, and she encounters by sneaking into his house, which is kind of a weird thing about this movie. She sneaks into his house and discovers that he has bugged or is listening in on the phone conversations of all of his neighbors, and he does it in a kind of indifferent way. Like, he's laissez-faire. Yeah, he is interested in the drama of it, but he doesn't but he's not. It's not his TMZ. It's more. He's more of a benign sort of like, isn't humanity interesting?
And you get the impression he's trying to like gather information to decide if he thinks humanity is inherently good or bad.
Right.
It's like he's still trying to judge in his retirement.
Very much so.
And he specifically says that he's not going to do anything with this information.
Yeah.
In fact, he thinks that it's better not to act, but he just finds it fascinating.
He very much fits what I would call a kind of French cinema stereotype of man tortured by like a philosophical problem. Like not a circumstance problem or like emotional. He just like is tortured by, is man worth saving? Am I a good man? Is anyone a good person? She is initially disgusted by this, though not disgusted enough to reject him outright. She kind of hears him out. She kind of finds his point of view intriguing. She leaves. Then I'm trying to remember exactly what happens next. He ends up turning himself in for this crime, and she reads about it in the newspaper. And she's like very surprised by that. So she goes to the courthouse, sees that he's there, and we then follow her back to the house to tell him like, hey, I didn't turn you in. And he's like, no, I turned myself in. And that's sort of the beginning of what I would call a friendship where they start to sort of explore each other's life in this platonically loving way. Like
there's a lot of scenes where they just sit and argue philosophy.
Yes, they do. And it's very, if it was an American movie, you would think this is a romance. It's not a romance. It's just like a very tender, deep friendship that it's sort of like they both learn about each other's stories. He has a dream about her, which we don't get all the information about, and she's intrigued by that. She invites him to one of her shows. So just skipping backwards, there's one other thread to this I haven't explained, and that is that all the while we're watching another young gentleman who is having a love story with a woman who then eventually breaks up with him because of this judge's interference. Like she meets another person because of the judge's phone calls.
But
August,
yes.
But it's important. It's coincidence. Like Abe said, the judge did not intercede in their story. He turned himself in. That woman happened to come to the court to like testify against him, or we presume be some part of the case, because it's like the whole neighborhood versus this guy, the court case.
Yeah,
and
it's a civil dispute.
Right.
It's like stop doing that.
And at court, she met another guy she likes better and went with him. So we have the seemingly unrelated character who's just getting his heart broken, basically.
And for a little while, we think that is Michelle. Like I think we're supposed to be misled.
There's a few thoughts I had up top, or I was wondering, is he fated to be with her by the end? Is that because it's not going to be the old dude? That's clearly platonic. Maybe this is her. You were wondering, why are we looking at this guy? Who is this guy?
Yeah, and it like literally like this movie, I would argue, really only coalesces into like a movie level irony at the end. Like it's like the whole time it's like it's still a movie obviously, but like the heightened sense that we expect from a movie of that kind of irony all kind of coalesces at the end. And the whole way we're just sort of watching these threads and like having an enjoyable experience of this judge and his growth. And this
but it would almost
just
be like a really well-made Lifetime movie without the end. You're right. The end recontextualizes everything you've seen in a way that elevates it to, oh, this is an important film. This wouldn't be on Lifetime. But the texture of it is just like people feeling emotions and talking.
And like sort of wistfully examining how what meaning there is in their lives and like sort of what we can learn from our moral dilemmas and the choices we made and that kind of stuff which I think is great.
It's pretty complex. Yeah. Like that's what I think if you're pushed away by the idea of like, oh, some scenes are just philosophical talking and you're like, it doesn't sound like, I would still give it a watch if you can get a hold of it at some point in your life, just because the amount of complexity with the characters is what really makes it. Because like, for example, she is brought to, when she sees that he's eavesdropping on people, like she's disgusted, but she comes back too, and it like all feels relevant to like the personal charm of Valentine.
Yeah, there's a kind of undercurrent of voyeurism the whole time in this movie, and because it was made long before our internet camera-soaked society. It feels very ahead of its time in some ways. Like everyone kind of, but also like very much of its time because of the technology. You know what I mean? It's like
right.
So
he's listening to people's conversations with like a police scanner,
and
like
a boombox.
the old timey.
Yeah.
Right. Like he's just tuning a radio receiver to try and intercept people's landline phone calls. So,
which like the kind of thing that like honestly, I don't even think people would get that up in arms about now. They might, but like certainly not to the degree that this movie posits they do.
To remake this in 2020, that would be a terrible thing to do. But if they did, yes, the method by which he invaded people's privacy would have to be more invasive because our standards are lower.
Yeah.
As far as
He'd
our
have to be
privacy goes.
Facebook.
Right,
Yeah, or Adam's right. He'd have
Cameras.
to be like hacking people's webcams and watching everyone through their webcams all the time.
Because I mean, we think the same thing about why he wants to hear it. That we would think of a person who's installing cameras, which is like, oh, you perv. Right? And the first phone call that we get that he's listening in on is listening to an affair. Right? And so she actually threatens to expose him, and then she goes over to the house of the man who's having an affair with, I believe, another man. Isn't that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, she doesn't know at the time. She just sees it as two lovers talking.
So she goes over to the house and discovers, oh my God, this man has a wife and a child. The child is also listening to the call, and she can't bring herself to...
The worst detail is she goes in the house and she sees the daughter doing that thing you used to be able to do on landlines, which is spy on a phone call by just holding another phone in the house to your ear.
Right. Yeah.
And the kid is just smiles and waves, and you can tell that the mom doesn't know what's going on, but the kid is hearing her dad betray the family, like in real time. And she is overwhelmed by how not telling them hurts their situation. They're already in a bad situation that's going to cause a lot of pain and break hearts. And her interceding would not lead to any better outcome. Which it would also cause a bunch of problems. And the judge, it's basically an object philosophy lesson for her because she comes back and then the judge says that. Like explains, you see, humans, or at least his stance at this point is like, the stories are beyond our ability to reverse or save. And in fact, a repeated refrain that he lobs at her that I think has merit but is not the full story is, why did you, the classic example is you hit my dog. Why did you get out of your car and save it? And she goes, because of the empathy I had for how much pain and fear the dog is feeling. And he goes, no, it's to avoid the feelings of guilt that you would have found unpleasant and uncomfortable to go through if you didn't do it, because it would be reflecting back to you that you're a bad person who doesn't care about dogs or whatever.
Right.
And both are true, of course. It's interesting that they both act like it can only be one or the other, but it's the same thing on a bigger scale, right? He's like, why did you feel the need to tell them? Well, because it's wrong. Well, then why didn't you do it? Well, because it wouldn't have really helped anything. And he's like, see? Ha-ha.
I mean, he's... No, I just want to say one thing about this, like, so that people don't get the wrong idea. It's not... When I say philosophical, I just mean that people talk about the underlying morality of it. It's still grounded very much in, like, narrative stories, like a people's like.
Oh yeah, it's not coffee and cigarettes.
It's not exactly. It's not that. Yeah. It's not a Godard film. It's not.
No, each scene, concrete stuff happens. Yeah. Like, oh, that broke. Now they're gonna have to go over here. Like, it's also doing story. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. It's and I think that's one of the reasons why it endures. To finish my synopsis of it. One of the things that the guy has like sort of a genuine interest in, this retired judge, is knowing the weather. Like, he's just like throughout the film several times he calls and like, what's the weather going to be in the English Channel? And the last time he calls, it's like, it's going to be perfectly sunny. It's going to be so beautiful. It's going to be so beautiful, in fact, that the person who does the weather is like taking a holiday. Like, that's how beautiful it's supposed to be. So, okay, great. So in the meantime,
I thought that was supposed to be Karen.
The person who does the weather is explicitly the girl who betrayed the rando guy. Yeah.
Oh,
in
August
fact,
and Karen are an item,
that's what makes it feel destined. Is like,
that's so good.
She is the girl who left the random guy that we see is about to leave on a yacht to cross the English Channel, and he follows her by getting on the ferry. At the same time, Valentine is getting on the ferry to go see Michelle, her off-screen lover who we've never seen. And we get the impression the judge is calling to make sure the weather's okay because he wants Valentine to be okay. He cares for her at this point.
Yes.
And you go ahead, Adam. Then what happens?
So then like, almost like a student film, like there just is a storm, and the ferry sinks, and like everybody on the boat dies, except for like 7 people, 5 of which are the main leads in all 3 of the films. So like Juliette Binoche's character from Blue survives, the one of the models and one of the shop owners from White survives, and then both Michelle and Valentine survive.
Not Michelle.
Auguste.
Oh, not Michelle. Sorry, Auguste.
Yeah.
Auguste
Who is
survives.
the guy we keep calling random guy,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
for
yeah.
sake of clarity, the guy whose heart gets broken is called Auguste.
And
Who was also training to be a judge, so
yeah,
there's
that's right.
parallels there
I
too.
thought for like there was a minute where I thought, is somehow this guy back in time? But I like, you know what I mean. But that didn't.
Okay.
Oh, there is a moment when after her, so like right before she leaves and she tells Kern, Joseph, the guy who's the eavesdropper, old judge, before the scene where the actual crash happens, there's a whole section where they like kind of have their final meet, and that whole section, I was like, this is almost like, I can totally believe, or I remember feeling like, is this like through time? Did they do something that I didn't pick up? And it's like, because there's scenes where you see Valentine, like when she's testing out the headphones, she's actually like checking out because she heard from Kern that this Auguste or Karen is dating a new guy, and she wants to see the infidelity. So she goes there out of like, just curiosity, just to watch. Like you can see how Joseph Kern is like infecting her. At that point, that's like the only scene where you really get. Well, otherwise it's Rear Window, where it's panning from one window to another window. And if you just get over the idea of like, in this continuous shot, it's possible to think that we're going through time. I thought for like the briefest of time that like, oh, Joseph is August.
I think that's absolutely the correct interpretation. I have a bunch of evidence to back that up. I firmly believe,
fascinated by that.
and that's the first thing I wanted to bring up, I think the movie is about time travel. I think Auguste is young Kern. I very much think so.
I think it's symbolically.
I don't think I think he
incredible.
literally is. And here's my point, or here's the theory, and I'm happy this is what we touched on because it's my main takeaway. Or that's how I interpreted the twist at the end that made me go, oh, that really elevates this. Do you guys remember, or are you? Let's see, where do I want to hook into this? It's a little dark, but do you remember that poem I wrote about my mom's sexual assault? Did you either of you ever read that? Okay.
Yeah, I did.
That is what I liked about it, or why when it came to me, I was like, wow, what a good function for a poem. It's about the idea of healing trauma to such a degree that we only exist in the present, right? So the poem's based around the idea of like, I wish my mom hadn't suffered a sexual assault in her youth, right? And now I am alive and exist, and she and I have a great relationship, and she has said that, having kids and blah, 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 and like the love and blah, blah, blah has like healed a lot of those wounds. And so I wrote this poem about like sending energy or sending your efforts back in time, and why can't we assume the past is it's abstract and it's highly weird, but why can't love reach back in time and change the past? We only exist in the present. Who's to say that didn't get undone? Or like,
it's kind of what Interstellar's
and
about.
there's a discipline called Reiki, which is like an energy healing thing, and at high levels they believe they can send energy through time and like heal trauma in the past. I was just using it as a poetic device. I don't believe it's literally true, but I think this movie is sort of centered around the same poetic device, because every time they are going to transition from one story to the other, like you said, it's always these interesting, like the camera flies across the courtyard into the guy's window. The other evidence I found is that he. Okay, so the important points that made me come to this conclusion are August drops a law book in the street and it opens up to a random page and he happens to read the thing on that page as he picks it up. Then later at the courthouse, when he achieves his dream of becoming a judge, he tells Karen, you know what, the craziest thing happened. Yeah, she gives him a pen. That I'm sure that's a symbol too, but the one I'm fixating on is he says, you know why I passed? The exam question they asked me by chance was the exact one my book fell open to that day. What are the odds?
Right.
Then when Kern tells Valentine about his tragic past or what made him lose faith in life or stop wanting to live, it's the story of, he says, once I was in love with a woman, she supported me through my legal efforts, I became a judge, and he even says, you know, it's funny, I became a judge because the question they asked, I happened to see in a law book I dropped that fell open.
Right, which definitely happened.
Which is literally what happened, yeah.
The
only thing that's different is their names. Yeah. And then he says, and she left me and went across the English Channel on a yacht with a dude, and it capsized, and she died in an accident, and I've been nihilistic ever since. And then he tells a story about what shook his faith in being a judge, which is the guy that stole his girlfriend lived and came back and ended up being judged by him for a crime. And he said, and I, no matter what way it was going to go, I, of course, said guilty and punished him. And that's what sort of shook my faith in, like, is judging even, who am I to judge, which is his state he lives in now. And so my argument, he also says, I dreamed about you when you were 50 and you were happy. He also tells her it was simple to guess when he's able to, like, preternaturally guess what she's thinking, or the fact that her brother has a heroin problem. When he tells her, she calls him out and says, you can't be this simple. You must have had a lost love. And he admits he did. And he says, how did you know that? And she said, it was pretty easy to guess. So in my mind, that ties him to, he is a book. He is a book of laws, philosophical laws that fell open in front of her and revealed the answer plainly. And he is taking his one regret in life and has a new opportunity by meeting Valentine to reach back in time and make his younger self, because he's old, he could never truly be with Valentine, make his younger self be in the crash and survive, because the final shot we see is a freeze frame of Valentine and August surviving together, like huddled together in blankets. They are strangers now, but I presume they will fall in love and have a beautiful relationship that is undoing the terrible relationship that Kern had in the past.
Did you guys notice that the last frame of the thing is the image?
Oh yeah,
that is the photograph.
So great. I love that.
It's so good because, like, they do the thing where they're like, all right, put like your sweatshirt when they're taking her photo, and they make her hair wet and they blow some air at her, and so when she's doing her photo shoot, and then that red background is just like a life raft. You know, it's like, oh, it's perfect, but it's hilarious because the ad is to sell bubble
it's like
gum,
that. Who's buying
Hollywood?
Who's buying gum from this scared wet lady? I don't know about
scared
that.
Wet lady gum. I think there's something there. I think that I want Adam to speak, but I did want to add some like a one little tarnish to your
Before you
theory,
do, can I add the third major piece of evidence?
Sure, yeah.
Although
think you're
I admit
right.
it has to be interpreted allegorically because, for example, she sees his Jeep with the Valentine in real time sees August's Jeep with the lights on and says his battery's going to die, which implies they exist temporally at the same moment, which undermines this. But I would also say it strengthens it because very pointedly, the script is written very carefully, clearly, and she says his battery's going to die. But that never becomes a plot point. So why is that scene there? I would argue to give you a clue that August and Kern are the same person, because later Kern says, I couldn't go on anymore. My battery was dead. He's saying I'm that guy. We're the same guy. He's me from the past.
Yeah.
Right.
There's definitely a lot of that happening.
And the last major recurring piece of evidence I want to bring up, and then I know I'm dominating, so I'll shut up for a long time because I really want to hear you guys assail this, is the use of glass, because glass implies separation. The film is about how ultimately we're alone, or our desire to connect, but we are in our own bodies or trapped, or we can't connect because time, we would be perfect together, but time separates us just by chance. If I'm 100 years older than you, we'll never get to meet. I died before you're born, and that's how it is. And of course, windows also imply voyeurism. And the two things I'll bring up, or three things, is when he finally admits to the neighborhood that he's been eavesdropping, the main method of them getting back at him is throwing rocks through his window and breaking the glass, so implying a loss of separation. He has walled himself off and been an observer who's separate, and now he's taken that step of allowing his glass to be broken. He's not separate. He's back in the mix. He's a human again. And very similarly, the only time he and Valentine... I'm sorry, that's not true because he grabs her hand in one other scene. But I think it's important, the scene where they say goodbye is they touch hands through a car window. So they're not really touching because they're not in the same timeline, is my argument. Last but not least, the last shot we see of Kern, which is right before the last shot, is literally just him staring right down the pipe, straight at camera, spiking lens, through his own broken window. And I have to imagine that shot is just saying the end of his arc is he is no longer separated. He's so connected to humanity that he's looking at you, the viewer.
He's broken the glass. Yeah.
That's all I got.
The transparent, invisible barrier that is in front of all people.
Yeah.
Relative to each other.
This movie's an interesting Rorschach test. It brings out different points of view. Because it's so. It very similar to the movie The Lighthouse, which I was just talking about with Dave. It sort of resists a explicit A to B summary.
Because you can shoot down any interpretation, because it's not. Yeah.
Yes. See, I think you could make a pretty good case that the judge is God.
That was my next one. Yeah, you go.
Right. I think you can make. Well, I mean, I don't want to do the whole thing with it, but generally speaking, the fact that he's a retired judge whose own hypocrisy makes him feel like he no longer deserves to be judge, but he can't help but spend the rest of his life sort of listening to, examining, and at some points interfering with the machine that he's running. You know what I mean? And that's also the same kind of... the last conversation that he has with Valentine at the empty theater is the one where a lot of that motif really starts to come out.
Yeah,
because
he's
of the
very
way
godlike in that scene.
Yeah, and he says things that are clearly meant to take on slightly more meaning than a person would take on. And she asks him for things. I wish I'd written it down. She asks him a few things.
He says, I had a dream you were happy, and she says, so that's going to happen?
Yes,
and what's interesting is he goes, yeah. Or he's confident in his own godliness. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and she is confident in his sight. It's very bizarre. People are so very sharp in this movie.
Very much so.
I love the opening interaction between them two is the following. Valentine goes, "Excuse me, the door was open. I'm sorry, I think I ran over your dog, Rita, a German Shepherd." The judge, displaying his lack of interest. "It's possible she disappeared yesterday, Valentine. She's in my car alive. I don't know what to do." After getting no response from the judge, she continues, "Would you like me to take her to a vet?" And then he displays even less interest. "As you wish." And then she retorts, "If I ran over your daughter, would you react the same way?" God, what an opening. And he says, you just met, you ran over this man's dog. I know he's showing no interest, but he could be in shock. There's so many things. But she immediately knows what's going on.
He's being a real dick, though. He's being a real dick.
Yeah, he is.
I like his response, "I don't have a daughter." And then
Right.
also
I
I really
either.
like the interchange from that same sequence, but a little earlier, when she says, well, what do you want me to do, or something like that, and he goes, I don't want anything.
I don't want anything.
And she
Why don't
says,
stop breathing?
then you should stop breathing. And he says,
Right.
good idea.
Good
And-
idea. But he can't.
Yeah.
That's another God
that's
theory
the
point.
opening lines.
That's
yeah.
another God theory
He's-
point. He can't stop breathing.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. He's immortal. There's something that kind of adds, to me, it kind of takes it home. It's kind of supports what you're saying, Michael, but also kind of takes away from the theory and brings it back to earth too. This is just wildly, like, crazy circumstance that these,
But it's just
all these
stuff that
aspects are
happened.
identical.
That argument.
It's just all stuff that happens, yeah. Which is that when they're talking, I think it's the when they're hearing the affair between Karen and the new dude, they are talking about what they want to go do, if they're gonna go bowling or if they're gonna do something else, and they flip a coin.
Mm-hmm.
And while they're flipping a coin on the phone call, the judge flips a coin as well. And they get two divergent reads, like someone gets heads, someone gets tails. And I think that is kind of what's happening. It's like a redo. It's what's happening is it's the thought experiment of an old man wishing that he could re-experience the way in which his life went with regret, hoping that circumstance, not like things he did, but just if something slightly different happened, how would my life be? And he gives that adage about the sailor who turns out to be him, when he's talking about the first man I judged, which is kind of clever because he's not talking about,
legally.
He's not talking about being in the courtroom and judging. He's just talking about judging himself, where he's talking about how the first case that he passed judgment on that he remembers, when she straight up asks him, is there anything like, is there altruism? And his response is, he tells a story about this sailor who did a crime and then went away for a while, came back, and then got imprisoned, which is, I think, metaphorically him. But ultimately, he benefited. He had children. He had like a wife. He had grandchildren. And they all loved him, and he was happy. And it seemed that the whole affair, even though he was a criminal,
The judge acquitted him also, is the point of the story. Is he's like,
Yeah, the judge
I knew he
acquitted
was
him.
guilty, but I
Yeah.
acquitted him. And you could argue that if I had jailed him, as we know, he would have been traumatized by that experience and maybe learned how to be a better criminal in jail. Like, his life would have
Exactly.
ended up worse. So he said,
or vice versa.
or he said, should
anything
I have
different.
acquitted everyone? Would that have made the world better
And
in the long run? What do you do? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the larger point is that, and he says it to her straight up at one point. His big change is that he goes from that nihilistic guy who's going to do nothing to his standpoint, like what his stance is at the end, which is that you just have to be. And I think what he means by that is that he's talking about how, yes, I've been misled because I thought that there was an answer to truth, and like there's something's true or something's not true. There's always truth. And I should be able to get all the details in order to find it out. But the reality is that later in life, depending on what happens, there's a caustic nature to everything. So if I do something and it causes me to do another action and cause someone to do like the butterfly effect, someone to do something else, and the net gain for humanity is good, who am I to say at the end, or vice versa, it makes it worse, and it was originally a good decision. Time peppers the kind of the way in which we look back at choices, and whether those choices were a good choice or a bad choice. He was kind of drawn to, he had become nihilistic and just decided to tap out of that question. Now he's encouraging Valentine to do the opposite. Just go make the choice, because we can never truly know what's going to happen. Make the best choice, that follow your heart, and that's not that like, that doesn't seem that wise, but it's a great way to back someone who's like, I don't see the purpose in this. Like, he like backed himself out of that problem in the same way that he turned himself in, even though no one was like, you're eavesdropping. No one knew. He was just like, no,
he exposed himself, which is an action. And we see in Act 3 that he does things like, yeah, I'll come to your show. I hope when you're back, we can like meet for coffee. It's as if God detached from his creation because he couldn't figure out how to do anything without fucking something else up. And then he finally got over it and decided, well, you're going to break some eggs, but I'm going to get back in there. You got to get back in there. You got to be.
Yeah. I love that shot where he's getting in his car and it shows, oh yeah, no one has like automatic garage doors or anything like that. Like, he has to get out. He has a cane. He has to open it up and close it and get in his car. It's just such a simple, like, why am I watching this? Is stupid. But then if you're following, it's like, oh man, he's going outside for the first time in like
it's
perhaps
super
years.
unnihilistic to do all the things it requires to go see a friend's show. Trust me, I love a lot of performers and I've skipped a lot of their shows because I don't want to find parking. So it's a big deal that this old curmudgeon, will take his cane out and open the thing and drive himself.
It's just kind of a beautiful shot.
The garage door opening one.
Yeah. I also think,
love that shot.
I also think supporting the God interpretation, and personally, I think him being God and it potentially being a time loop are both intentionally present. I think you're meant to read both or either. But more like God imagery that I got that I thought was really great is if he's God and he called the weather lady and she said it's going to be good, and he's God in that moment and said, no, it's going to be a storm. You know, like if we decide he's God and he made that happen, then I think it's very notable that Rita has 7 puppies and God chose to spare 7 people from the wreck. I also think it's very notable that it looks like just organic blocking, but very scrupulously. Whenever she's there to talk philosophy with this dude, just like dancers do, I've noticed dancers do this. She doesn't take a chair. She like just sits on the floor, like elegantly, because dancers are flexible or whatever, comfortable sitting on their knees. Yeah. And you're like, that's just a thing. But it is literally the image of someone like learning at the feet of God. And the only time she's notably above him is he comes to see her runway show, and then he comes down to the front of the stage, which puts her naturally towering over him. So it's like a moment where she has approached godliness because she's starting to open herself up to the truths of the universe. And yet he reaches up, she takes his hand, and he pulls her down to his level while they continue to talk. So I do think that supports the God allegory of like, I teach you, you become more divine by learning from God, and then somehow in the end we reach like an equanimity. But she can't be above God. I think that's why he pulls her down.
Yeah, and that scene is about her saying goodbye. It's her taking an action, being proactive in her life that she's kind of unhappy
and
with.
She's going to see Michelle, right? Which is interesting because something we haven't said explicitly is Michelle's main function is to be a fucking prick.
Yeah, he's overbearing and possessive.
He constantly thinks she's cheating on him, which she clearly is not.
I thought... Yeah, it was unclear to me as well why she's going there. I thought it had maybe something to do with her brother who does heroin.
She was going to stop along the way to visit her family
on
a
the cover story
to England.
Is that she's meeting Michelle because Michelle's working in England, and she's going to stop on the way to see her brother. So again, there's that dual interpretation. It's never revealed which does she care more about, or what is the thing that pushed her over the edge to say, I'm going to go on the boat. It's multiple. We don't know.
It was convenient trip, but I think it's supposed to be because also there's something to be said about like she's gonna go there for work as well. It's like she's just taking care of business. She's going to England because it's just like that makes a lot of sense because I gotta tell my brother to get my brother off heroin. That's something I want to do. I gotta tell off my possessive boyfriend to stop doing this bullshit, and and she happens to probably I mean, the implication is that Auguste and her fall in love. It's as if to say she's just doing the thing that makes sense to her, and then love is, and all the things that, and the dream that Kern is saying is that's
and
her
taking
path.
she's
I think that's all we're supposed to
she's
take
open to
from
signs from the universe, right? It's like, I'm thinking about going to England. My boyfriend's going to be working there. I was going to meet up with him, but he's kind of a dick, so maybe I won't go. Oh, my brother's temporarily in England. Oh, and I got a job in England. I guess the universe is telling me to do this.
Kismet.
I think so.
There's a kismet to it.
Yeah.
That's totally accurate. You know, when I was watching this movie, I thought to myself, like, it's almost the same theme and in some ways message as "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" You've seen, like, I know you've seen that movie, but like, have you seen it? Have you seen it?
Oh, brother,
so,
what
like,
is that?
Yeah. But like, that's
brother.
another movie where the entire time there are events that are pseudo magical. You know,
magical.
But
yeah.
also, like, the key event, which is the sort of salvific moment for George Clooney's character, Ulysses. What's his name again? It's Ulysses S. something, but what's his first name? I forgot.
Oh yeah,
Well,
He's
he's
the paterfamilias. I know that.
Yeah, the paterfamilias.
Yeah,
The
he's the
Worthy
paterfamilias.
Gals. Wow. Well,
Yeah.
no, I don't remember his
I
name.
don't know.
Yeah, I can't remember his.
Everett
Yep.
McGill.
Everett McGill?
Yeah, Everett.
Yeah, Ulysses Everett McGill.
right.
But Everett is what he goes by. So he has that.
that's such a
It's
name.
so good. He has that moment of salvation where he's literally captured by the devil, as described in the movie, and then he's about to be hung, and he prays, right? And at that moment,
Yes.
a flood is sent in. Yeah,
The
the levee
levee,
breaks.
yeah.
But it's a thing that's been known was going to happen from the beginning of the movie. Like, they're going to dam this thing up,
Right.
and they're washing
Right.
everything out, and, you know.
Well,
the-
Adam, any man will cast about in a time
Right.
of doubt.
In a time of stress. Yeah. But that's like, it's kind of fun to watch the movies and compare the
Tacticians.
different cultural explorations of the same topic, because the French
Yes.
one or Polish, whatever, however you want to delineate that, is a lot less concerned with the sort of fun of it. Like, it's not as fun. You know what I mean? Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is like having a good time with the idea of, is it fate,
Sure.
is it not? Like, even though things work out in this sort of magical way. And ultimately, like, red is magic.
Oh, there's
You know what
so
I mean? Like,
much
it's
that is
magic.
serendipitous that fate
Yeah.
has to be a theme. It's obviously a theme, yeah.
Right. And it's like, I think the photograph in particular is the thing that's like, that's impossible for it to be a coincidence. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of things that are like, oh, that's just interesting and it correlates. And then there's that moment where the director's like, no, it was meant.
Yeah.
You know?
But for the record, because I looked it up, Ulysses Everett McGill is right. This is
Yeah.
just funny to me. Their character names on IMDb are Ulysses Everett McGill, Delmer O'Donnell, and Pete. Just Pete. He didn't get a full name.
He's just
Yeah.
Pete. RUNNOFT.
I just think it's kind of fun if somebody is interested in, like, doing any kind of cultural comparison, they're actually not that far apart in terms of time. Like,
Really? Wait, do you mean
Red-
runtime?
No, in terms of
Okay.
when they were made. Red was made in, like,
2000
94.
and 1994, so
6 years. It's not a crazy different amount of time.
It feels older, but I think
It
that's
does.
probably it's because American films tend to spend more money on getting the sharpest image possible.
Yeah,
you know?
it's Arturo.
And Oh
movie.
Brother, Where Art Thou is also, like, really heavily color corrected.
It broke ground in that field, so
Yes.
it looks very fresh and ahead of its time.
And Roger Deakins
Yeah,
shot
exactly.
it.
But and also, it's interesting that Rouge is one of the first uses of Steadicam in cinema for that country, according to Wikipedia.
yeah, I also know some Technocrane.
I like
yes
that
stuff.
Technocrane
Did you
shot
notice,
a
like,
lot,
when the
yeah.
Yeah, when it like went really like the cinematography in this needs to be
It's
pulled
great.
out a little bit. The opening sequence is fascinating because it's just power lines, or I'm sorry, it's phone
Yes.
lines under the English Channel, and so it's like just the shot is just like super sped up. and it just follows wires, and it's just like, okay, so
And
this
in
is about
fact,
interconnectedness is what you're supposed to get, which
but
is
also
right.
wires are used. It's about connectedness and separation in the same way that glass
Yes.
is about separation, but if you
Right.
break it, it's about connectedness. It's interesting to me that another thing that I think kind of supports the time travel interpretation is whenever we see Valentin and August in the same place in the same scene, they are very intentionally separated by a compositional wire. There's like the most notable is they're at a listening station, like a CD shop, and she's standing there and so you have all these headphone jacks hanging down, and one is just perfectly hanging exactly parallel, like vertically down to separate. He's over on this side of frame, she's over on that side of frame. And similarly, when they get on the ferry, the lines are used to separate them in frame all the time. And I thought that was maybe supportive of the idea that, yes, you're looking at the same frame, but he's in a different time than she is. She's on this time, he's on that time.
Kieslowski is one of the things they teach you about him in all the classes that I've been taught him. Two,
in
I
all
guess.
2 classes, in both classes.
One of the something they both mention is how particular he is, and it's not this film, but in Blue, for example, one of the cooler stories about this guy is that he had to he I don't think he had to stop like shooting or anything like that, but one of the biggest problems was that he had to make sure that a cup of coffee would dissolve a sugar cube in a specific amount of time, down to the second, in order for a shot to work. And so he had his production design team make different concoctions of sugar cubes and buy many, like ones that were made
at different
just for
densities or whatever,
normal consumption, at different densities and made up of different stuff in order to find the one that would come out to like 67 seconds or whatever it was. And it was like, he wanted it to be real slow and he wanted it to be timed out perfectly, and they had to make a sugar cube just for that shot.
That's
and
awesome.
It worked. So it's like, and this guy does it on all of his films. You can
I think it's
tell
hard
that everything.
I think it's hard to appreciate the fact that movies didn't used to be this heavily designed. Like in 1994, movies were not as strongly color paletted or designed in the to this degree. In like,
it's still pre like Amelie and Wes Anderson.
Right, it's pre-twee, and it's also like pre-heavy color correction, like, which is a thing that kind of got ushered in the late 90s. So this is like ahead of its time in the sense that it creates it creates a kind of expression of the subtext through design, which is not often done. I mean, certainly there are movies in the past like The Graduate or other movies that like have a motif that expresses some of the subtext, but rarely in the form of like color and shot design to this degree before this.
A question then, and I knew we'd get around to this. One of the only things that I thought was it was pretty and cool. I'm not mad at it. But one of the only things that I get no meaning from is visually, it becomes quite apparent. Everything's red, or, the vast majority of the things in the film are red, and it's because the movie's called Red, and I'm going to presume that tracks in blue and white as well.
Yep.
Is
Blue
there
and white.
any
Or
meaning?
in blue
Is
and
there
red.
any meaning to be derived from that? I didn't get anything from it, really. I just thought it was an affectation.
I think it's the same thing that Edgar Wright does with his
Or it's like
Cornetto
saying,
trilogy,
does Wes Anderson have to have
but it's a lot more painted.
reason he does postcard shots? No, it's just his thing he does.
Exactly.
That's okay.
No.
I'd push back on that a little bit. I think that it serves a kind of emotional function of like sort of pushing the undercurrent of passion and the sort of the subtext of like desire. There's a desire in this movie that's kind of understated, a desire to connect,
And
a desire to know and understand, and it's never stated. It's implied in everything everybody else does.
And you think the red is just another implication of that, implier of that?
Yeah, I think the red is kind of putting it, like making it text somewhere in the movie. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like the desire and passion of the movie is textualized there. I don't think you can say it means that 100%, but I think it does that function.
Okay. I accept that.
It deepens the emotions. Yeah.
Oh, I just realized another one for the time travel that I didn't think of. August abandons a dog and then recovers it, and so does Kern. Yeah.
Yep.
It is his dog, but there's a
his
period
dog,
where he says to
but-
Valentine, I don't want the dog back, it's your dog. And then later she goes, are you sure? And he goes, nah, I'll take the dog back.
Yeah, abandoning a dog.
I think it's very telling, like how times have. That was one of the most times have changed moments. Was like watching her pick up that dog.
Well, the dog's acting was garbage, but what are you going to get out of a dog?
I mean, what are you going to do?
Super not. It looked
such
super
a
not
great
injured
time.
or unhappy. It looked fine. Yeah.
What are you going to do? Yeah, it was a happy pup.
I mean, they're thinking it's
to get it to
a win,
lie
just,
still. Yeah.
just
Right.
that it's staying.
This is pre the Airbud technology of getting 100 dogs.
Yeah. She's lifting most of the
Well,
weight
and also
in that
I'm
scene.
thinking to myself, like, nobody's picking up an injured dog that got hit in the streets like this, are they? Like, right. And it was, the movie didn't seem concerned about, is that even safe or smart? And I feel like that's just a thing you wouldn't do in a movie now. Now the assumption of the culture would be a little bit more
Call
like,
the vet.
Oh, don't call a vet or get somebody who
Animal
knows what they're doing
control,
here.
whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, don't just pick up the dog. You need to think it through.
Especially when the
lady.
dog is like heavier than you because you're a model. You're like a wispy thing, and it's a giant German Shepherd.
Yeah.
Can I say I thought this was like a really cool piece of casting, the lead, because she's fantastic. Part of it is, and I say this because this is a true thing about casting. Part of it is just like her face. She has this like very curious, constant expression.
Mm-hmm.
Like her resting face is a sort of youthful, like curious, like look.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds dumb, but like,
You're right
that sounds
about that.
dumb, but like, imagine just sub her out and put a young Gina Gershon or somebody like that in that part, and it's a totally different feeling because she doesn't have the same feeling of being inquisitive, and that really eradicates the questions you have about, like, should you be walking into people's houses?
Where you're like, she has
like,
a good heart. You can see it on her face. She's young and naive, and she's trying her best. Yeah. And, of course,
and
he does his due diligence of establishing that because she's a dancer and a model, and you see her routine, and you see that she is very game to follow the rules. Like, she'll dance however you instruct her to dance. She'll do modeling even though it hurts very much. Or, we see that her life is very taxing, and she works very hard to look right and go through the right motions that are expected of her. So she starts out being fully of society and never questioning, is justice moral? No, she would say, well, if the judge said you're guilty, they must be right. They're a judge. How could they become a judge if they don't know how to judge? And I think by the end of the film, she doesn't think about things that simply. She's grown up.
Yeah, I guess, like, maybe, you're the only person that I have heard come up with a feasible explanation for why she's a dancer in this movie. The model part I understand because it serves a purpose narratively later. The dancer part, we go to it a few times, and the thing that's interesting about it is that it seems very strenuous. Like, her dancing, she seems like this is hard.
And it is, ballet
this is the
is
hardest
like
part
painful
of the
and
day.
really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
she struggles. Like, it's not a fun thing. Like, she downs like a whole thing of water.
Let me assure you, I would never do it. There's no chance it ever happens to this old bear.
I don't think I can
either.
I'm doing it right
but it's
now.
not. You carawaying friend. I would just say that it's not. It's so interesting to include ballet and never make it look elegant. It
looks like a difficult job because we only ever see rehearsals. Yeah.
Right. So that it only serves to add a little bit of pain in her life.
And I think that is the purpose. And it's almost a save the cat, save the dog moment of, like, I liked her immediately because she is a hard worker and she's trying so hard to do what she thinks would be good for life. Like she wants to do a good life and be part of the community and do what the community expects from her, and even if it's really hard, and she doesn't even question it at the beginning. And I think that's something about what the dancing scenes are about.
And she's like an ethical center because she thinks the way that we think.
Yeah, she's neutral,
and she's not
right.
pessimistic.
She's neutral, and she's not a pessimist. And her life doesn't have enough suffering for her to have what you might call a wise or begrudging perspective on it at all. You know, whereas the French judge. See, my favorite thing about him is that like he doesn't really change would be my argument. I know that you guys are saying like, oh, he rejoined society. My argument is he doesn't actually. That what he's done is he's sort of unraveled the story of who he is to somebody who's finally willing to listen to him. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like because I understand that he does make the agency choice of getting in the car. He does go to that theater. He does turn himself in. That's true. All that's true. But I don't think it's because she convinced him of anything. I think it's her that gets convinced by him of who he is and his character.
Yeah, but he actively changes because of her. And you're right, it's personal. But when he's asked specifically, why did you turn yourself in? His response is because I saw the disgust on your face.
Is that what he says? I'm trying to remember that
no,
line.
It's not. It's closer to.
There's two lines.
I thought
you guys are thinking of the.
No, I'm thinking of the one
one
you're thinking of. But he says, "I thought you pitied me." Now and then later, I realized it was disgust.
Yeah, he does say that.
She says, "Why'd you turn yourself in?" And his answer is, "When we as he's often as he's cryptic, he just says, when we first spoke, I thought you pitied me. Later, I realized it was disgust." And she goes, yes. And that's his answer to, that's why I turned myself in. It's cryptic, but it makes sense.
But it doesn't feel, maybe it's because of how he said it. It didn't feel like the reason to me. It felt like him sort of dancing around answering the question. Like a lot of things that he does. Like he kind of, and again, he does feel to me, maybe it's because I'm interested in the God metaphor here. He does feel to me like a person who's like sort of ably dodging anybody else's culpability by holding himself to his own standard, his his God standard, if you will. So you can't accuse me because I have done worse, because I know what worse is. And then like she comes to agree with him.
Yeah, although
and to see his wisdom.
I don't know. I thought the movie was trying to elevate her to a position of divinity just at the end around the show, both because of the height thing I mentioned and because
the height
right
thing.
After they touch hands through the car window, so they're separated by glass, but they touch fleetingly, or whatever that represents.
Right.
We linger on the scene, and it can't be for no reason because the director's so meticulous. She goes over to a recycling bin where an old woman is struggling to get a bottle in. She touches the old woman's hand and helps her push the bottle through the hole, which results in the sound of breaking glass. So I just think that's saying she ascended to the point where she has enough agency to connect with someone, meaning touch a hand, and break the glass, meaning break through the wall of separation. That's something he can't even do because he can't break the car window. Well, you know what I mean?
That's interesting.
Yeah. I think it's. You go.
I think I just end up quibbling with you about what to take from that. I don't think that equality is what we get from it.
No, I don't think equality, but I just think it means that she has the ability to force connection into people's lives.
Right. She's been converted, if you will. She's been like empowered by him. You know what I mean? Like the impact he has on her.
Interesting. I view it as her being self-empowered and him benefiting from witnessing it. But that's interesting.
This is the Rorschach piece. This is, you know what I mean?
See, this is fascinating to me because I don't agree with. I agree with philosophically why both of you
see the evidence we see.
I see the evidence. I do not see that's what this film is. This film to me is very much so like a 3D model, or rather like a timeline of altruism. And by that I mean everyone's personal kind of how we traverse altruism, how we think about other people, and if they're good or bad, or when we meet new people, if we think that it's true that they're good or bad or whatever. We kind of change throughout our life, fluctuate based off what's happening to us. It's a very living document. And this is just looking at Valentine, who is in her journey with that, and it's looking at Kern at his journey with that, and it's just pulling out parallels, saying, hey, they could be the same person, you take any pairing of people in the film and they're kind of like a reflection of each other at a different time, or not, it's kind of just trying to show you everything about how people perceive their neighbors and what's the nature of fraternity. It asks the bigger question of why are we altruistic? Is altruism
that's an interesting
real?
I just want to ask like one question, and like it's a basic one, and that is, what is the change that happens to her in the movie? Because my pitch for it is that she becomes less contemptuous of her fellow human beings. And I know that's like, well, she wasn't contemptuous before, except for that's what the judge is. The judge is a thing she's disgusted by. Mm-hmm. And then at the end, she's not disgusted by it anymore, which is why she can engage with her brother's heroin addiction, why she can help an old lady with her bottle at that bizarre recycling center, and why she's connected to this guy who is at least a civil criminal, if not a voyeur and a maniac. Like he has that impact on her. Does that scan for you, or do you think that doesn't make sense?
It scans for me, although it feels like if that's the message, then I just disagree with the filmmaker, or I don't like that interpretation. And that's fine. Someone can say a thing that I don't like, and it's still what they meant to say. But because that, like, if the goal is to lose all your contempt, I think there's such a thing as like boundaries, or like that would imply that because she's going to England where her brother and work and Michelle are. And if you're saying that she grew enough that she can overlook her brother's flaw of being addicted to heroin and Michelle's flaw of being, that's where I'm like, I don't like that, because Michelle's a prick. Like, this is a grounded response, but I don't want it to be that she learned to accept her abusive boyfriend and be like, well, he's human and we're all flawed, and I've grown to realize I can't be disgusted by him just because he's a huge prick. Sure, you can. You don't have to like huge pricks, or like you can think people are assholes and distance yourselves from them because they're toxic to you. That's allowed.
But I don't think that I don't get the sense that the movie is suggesting she's going to tolerate her boyfriend. I get the sense that like a reckoning has come either by happenstance or by virtue of her going there.
Okay, so you're not saying she's learned to tolerate all of humanity.
No. She's put her own contempt for people who she doesn't connect to or understand or know how to deal with aside.
Yeah. Well, I think what's really notable is just that we could go several more hours because it's a movie that's how you know bears watching, and repeated watchings. I agree with that. Yeah, it's a real Rorschach test, even though everything that happens is very clear. It's not Mulholland Drive. And yet, like many good, densely layered stories, it can be unpacked probably 10 or 12 different ways before you were like grasping at straws, you know? There's a lot of interpretations that are there.
Yeah, it's like a novel.
Yeah.
It's dense like that.
My real quick response to that, I guess, is that I think that she thinks he did the right thing in turning himself in. So she's empathetic that he's changed, and that's why the friendship moved past just her fascination with what he's doing and with him and like as a project, and the friendship bloomed because she saw that he had the capacity to change. She is ethically unchanged throughout the film. She doesn't do anything out of sorts ethically. She just determines to move on with her life. So I don't think that I don't know, it's the way you phrased it, Adam. I don't know necessarily if she has an ethical concern with the arc of the movie. She's just a player and is basically a very someone who's an artifact of the audience, someone who's just essentially
an observer,
a placeholder.
She's just an observer. It's interesting because that's basically what he is. Although he does make it, he does do stuff. So
exactly, I think it's more about the actions, but that's I think it's, as Michael was saying, it's very important for everyone to kind of come to their own interpretation of it. That's what this type of movie is for, and it's kind of it excels
99% of movies I'd be happy to say
talk about it.
No, I'm pretty sure this is what it means. You should accept my interpretation. I have evidence and shit. This one I'd be like, why would you accept one interpretation? There's definitely multiple. It's definitely not just one right answer.
Yeah, that's definitely
it's
true.
Lighthouse.
It's whatever
baby.
works. Or as Adam said,
Lighthouse,
Rorschach.
baby.
Yeah.
It's a lighthouse.
It's a lighthouse, and that's
Hell yeah.
a frame rate. Is there anything else you guys wanted to say, or can we just go to the Adam pitch yourself?
Pitch me.
I'll just
justify your existence.
Well, I'm
Pitch me.
excited to hear that, but I was just going to say it really helps us out if you go to iTunes and rate Small Beans. So please rate us, give us a review. We'll probably start finding some feedback and reviews and enshrining them on the podcast so that people are more incentivized to do that. So go say something about us on iTunes and maybe you'll hear yourself later.
And also for the beanies, the Patreon beans, I just want to announce that as of you listening to this this bean broadcast, this week there's going to be a big project that we've been working on and keeping on the down low that's going to release. That's going to be a lot of fun, and it's exclusive.
A lot of work went into it, and we've kept it mostly... Like on Twitter, once or twice I've hinted about it, but you basically don't know what it is. So we got a big surprise for you that a lot of work went into, and it's patron only.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Yeah, we're real excited about it.
We think it's fun.
We think it's fun. We think it's fun.
Adam, why should you exist? I don't know why Abe asked you that, but I want to hear the answer.
It's because it's like people pitch themselves, and then I thought, like, okay, if he's pitching himself, why is he pitching himself? What manner of beast is man? Justify your existence. I don't know. I have a weird
My name is
brain.
Adam Ganser, and I am a whirlwind of passion and darkness and thought. You can participate in it in several ways. You can go to my Instagram called The Real Gans. You can go to my Twitter feed. It's also The Real Fucking Gans. You can listen to my podcasts. They are director piece theater. They are one-upsmanship. I have much to say. You will learn from me. You will hear from me. I have more. There will be more.
That's
I have more. God, that's so good.
That was very
I'm so
good.
hyped, dude.
Also, it's
I'm
Gans
so
with a Z.
fucking hyped.
The
Yes,
Real
it is.
Gans. Yep.
Yeah,
The real one.
the real Gans, which is not how you spell your name, but hey.
On Twitter, Abe's at
you
Abe the
chose it.
Mighty, and I'm at Swaim_Corp. And we'll see you next time on Frame Rate. Yeah?
Smooches.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Beans.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.